Today, I'm reflecting back on the time of my life. I was born in 1922 in Altona, Manitoba. My parents had a wonderful marriage, and they were quite well established after receiving a decent wedding gift from both sides. My dad started a shop in Altona, and his first idea was to open a showroom of coffins that he had started to build. He had a beautiful showroom on the second floor of his business, all sizes from adult to child. It was a real good business. And he did other things. He had a blacksmith shop on the side. He sharpened plowshares for farmers and did all kinds of blacksmith work, besides being one of the best carpenters I've ever known. He built instruments in the winter time when it was quiet. He built violins, he built guitars, harps, all kinds of instruments, very good ones too. Then, one day, the stock markets crashed. And after that, it left most people unemployed, no work, and no money circulating. Dad kept plugging away, but most of his work that he done for people was written down to be paid at a later date. It was hard to make ends meet. He had 5 children, 3 boys and 2 girls. Then, one night, when the last child was born, Martha, his wife, or my mother, suffered something like polio, and she was just crippled up overnight. She stayed in bed for 7 years without getting out of bed. He had a very hard time with children, a sick wife, and a depression setting in. The depression was very hard, and it was all over the world. Then, by 1936, he had not been able to pay the taxes on his property, and the municipality sold our property for the taxes. That left us without a home, and from there we packed up and we moved to Bunkhill for 1 year. From there we had to somehow try to see what we could do. We boys were trying to get the odd jobs here and there to keep things going. We stayed in Bunkhill for about a year, and then we moved to Winnipeg. In Winnipeg, it was easier to find little jobs, and we had rented a little home, and we were all together until 1939 when the war broke out. In 1940, three brothers, Shorty, Pete, and myself, enlisted for the war effort, and we stayed in Winnipeg a few months, and then we were transferred to Camp Orden, Ontario. We trained with tanks. Our regiment was the Fort Garry Horse, and we were armored, tanks and trucks. After training in Camp Orden, we got a leave to come back home, and it was the beginning of a plan to go overseas. After our leave, we were transferred to Camp de Bert in Halifax, near Halifax. And there we went into a camp waiting to be transferred to Great Britain. 1941, we all sailed on a 3-week voyage across the Atlantic. And we arrived in England with being billeted in a cavalry barracks. It was damp and cold. We were not used to a climate like that in wintertime. And then from then on, we trained in Britain for a good 4 years and prepared for invasion to France. During the years that we stayed in England training, we spent quite a few leaves in Scotland. All three of us went to Motherwell, Scotland in 1941. The reason was Jack Campbell had been going with my sister Anne, and his family lived in Motherwell. So we set out to visit them. And during that time, I met Betty, and she was a manageress in a music store. Went in to buy some guitar strings, and that started the romance between Betty and I. I spent all my leaves in Scotland during that period while we were in England. Then we had always talked about getting married, but we said, well, we would be wise to wait until the war was over. Well, then, one day, everything pointed toward an invasion for France. And on June the 6th, 1944, we started off. The invasion was in waves, and Shorty was in the first wave at dawn. And Pete and I were in the third wave, and that took us to the shores of France toward evening. It was quite a messy battle, and we carried on through. Shorty was wounded in Falaise, France, and he was flown back to England, and that was his war effort over with. He was in a hospital for about 6 months. He was badly wounded in the shoulder and the neck, and he was in a way lucky because there was three soldiers in his vehicle, and he was the only one that survived. The other 2 were killed. We carried on and went on through Belgium, through Holland, and into Germany through the Siegfried Line in the Black Forest. And then eventually it was VE Day. The war was over in Europe. But they asked some of us if we wanted to enlist to go and finish the war in the Pacific against the Japanese, and I volunteered for that also. But I first of all had to make a quick trip to Scotland. I got a special leave, and Betty's mother arranged a nice wedding in the church. And Betty and I were married on June the 26th in Motherwell, Scotland. We had a short honeymoon in England, but it was just for 5 days, and I had to be off to Canada. It's hard to leave Betty, but I had volunteered to go, and I couldn't get out of it. So when we got back to Canada, we were preparing to leave for San Diego and then on to the Pacific. And it was about 2 days before we were supposed to leave. They dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, and then another one on Nagasaki. And that ended the Second World War. It wasn't long after that we were discharged and back in civilian clothes. I got a job just to try and establish something for Betty coming back. I rented an apartment in Norwood on the 2nd floor, and we furnished it with a little bit of re-establishment money we got from the government. And in 1946, Betty was one of the war brides arriving in Canada, and she brought with her our little 6-month-old Patricia. We stayed in Norwood for not too long, and we moved on to the west side of Winnipeg. And we were in there only for about 3 or 4 months when we got a new wartime home. I had enough points because I had served quite a bit of time overseas, and we received a new house on Boyd Avenue. We were quite happily there, and my friend Harvey Scott, who was my commanding officer from Belgium on to Germany, we had established a little group that we delivered tanks to the front line for the ones that were being shot out of order. While Harvey Scott was with Manitoba Pool Elevators, and he asked me if I would like to come to the Pool Elevators and train as a grain buyer. From there, I was employed with Pool Elevators, and we shipped out to Morris, Manitoba, where we stayed for about a year when they built a new elevator association in St. Jean Baptist, Manitoba. And these were all nice new facilities, and this community decided to hire me as their first manager. We lived in St. Jean for 18 years. The children had a good schooling. They spoke fluently French. And when that time come to an end, Betty's brother, Bill Kay, he had started a store in Headingley, Manitoba. And he was occupied with other things. He couldn't manage it. So he asked us if we wanted to take it over from him. So we decided to pack it up in St. Jean and move to Headingley, Manitoba, and take this general store over. Well, we run the store for 20 years quite successfully. Betty and I had many a holiday, many parts of the world during that time. We worked hard, but for a long time business was very good. And after 20 years, I was struck with a heart attack. And we decided there that we couldn't continue. So we decided to close the store and put it up for sale. We disposed of most of our property in Winnipeg and decided to retire in Victoria, British Columbia. We've come to Victoria in 1986. And we have now lived here for about 16 years. From here, we took many a holiday all over, especially Hawaii. We spent a holiday practically every year in Hawaii while we were retired here. Now it's 2001. And Betty, your mother, has been placed in an institution with dementia problems. I find it's very sad and hard to cope with it, but I go down, spend most of my days there, and try and comfort her. I wandered today to the hill, Betty, to watch the scene below. The creek and the creaking old mill, Betty, as we used to long ago. The green grove is gone from the hill, Betty, where first the daisy sprung. The creaking old mill is still, Betty, since you and I were young. And now we are aged and gray, Betty, and the trial of our life is nearly done. Let us sing of the days that are gone, Betty, when you and I were young. They say I am feeble with age, Betty. My steps are less sprightly than now. My face is a velvet page, Betty, but time alone with the pen. They say we are aged and gray, Betty, as spray by the white breakers flung. But to me you're as fair as you were, Betty, when you and I were young. Now we're aged and gray, Betty, and the trial of our life is nearly done. Let us sing of the days that are gone, Betty, when you and I were young. Precious Savior, still our refuge, take it to the Lord in prayer. Do thy friends despise, forsake thee? Take it to the Lord in prayer. In his arms he'll take and shield thee. Thou wilt find a solace there. So many today do not believe in a supreme being. They don't see or can somehow visual such a thing as God. Well, I don't know myself if there is a God, but all I know is by following the good scriptures of the Bible makes you a better person. It's only for mankind to behave better on this earth. So, if there is a God or if there isn't a God, it is something that comes to everybody's mind at one time in his life. And then in my mind, I hope by believing in Jesus Christ, it has made me a better person.